My name is Lydia Hawthorne, and at 72 years old, I've discovered that silence can be the sharpest weapon in a family's arsenal. If you're watching this story, please like and subscribe to Voices of Rosa and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. I want to know how far the truth can travel when it finally breaks free from the shadows. You see, there's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house when secrets begin to breed, like spiders in the corners. It's different from the peaceful hush of evening prayers or the comfortable stillness of a Sunday afternoon. This silence has teeth. It bites. It draws blood drop by crimson drop until you're standing in a pool of your own naivety, wondering how you became prey in your own home. 3 years ago, I thought silence was my enemy, a cruel thief that stole the music from my world after a nasty tumble down my basement stairs cracked my eardrum like an eggshell. The doctors spoke of hearing loss, of aids and adjustments, of learning to live with diminished capacity. But sometimes, what looks like weakness becomes your greatest strength. Sometimes, what others perceive as disability becomes your most devastating advantage. What I'm about to tell you will make you question everyone you trust, everyone you've welcomed into your home with open arms and an open heart. Because the people closest to us, the ones who kiss our cheeks and call us family, are often the ones sharpening their knives in the dark. It wasn't always this way. Once, my Victorian home in the quiet suburbs of Willow Creek echoed with laughter that felt like sunshine spilling through stained glass windows. Harold's booming baritone voice would bounce off the wraparound porches as he regaled dinner guests with fishing tales that grew more elaborate with each telling. Our son Ronan would chase fireflies in the backyard until the stars blinked awake, his gigless mixing with the evening chorus of crickets and katydids. Those days feel like faded photographs now, tucked away in albums, gathering dust on the attic shelves. But grief has a funny way of sharpening your other senses, even as the world around you dulls to gray. Harold passed on a Tuesday in March, his heart giving out like a worn-out engine while he tended to his prize-winning roses. The doctors said it was quick, peaceful, small mercies in a world suddenly devoid of his steady presence. For months afterward, I drifted through the house like a ghost, touching the worn leather of his favorite chair, breathing in the faint scent of his aftershave that still clung to his sweaters. Ronan worried, hovering like a protective shadow, bringing casseroles I couldn't taste and tea that grew cold in forgotten cups. The fall happened 6 months later, during one of those brutal winter storms that turned February into a biting, merciless thing. I'd gone down to the basement to check the furnace, Harold's old domain, full of mysterious pipes and switches I'd never needed to understand. The stairs were slick with condensation, treacherous as black ice, and my foot slipped on the 3rd step down. The world tilted, spun, and I found myself crumpled at the bottom like discarded laundry, my head ringing with a sound like church bells cast in hell. The emergency room was a blur of bright lights and concerned faces, doctors probing my skull with gentle fingers while machines beeped their electronic lullabies. "Cracked eardrum," they pronounced, as if naming a broken dish. "Some hearing loss, likely permanent. Tinnitus, that ringing will fade, but it may never disappear entirely." They fitted me with hearing aids, small flesh-colored devices that buzzed and hissed like angry hornets trapped in amber. The aids were finicky things sensitive to moisture and prone to feedback that made me wince. Conversations became exercises in frustration. Voices muffled as if spoken through cotton, background noise amplified until a dropped fork sounded like a gunshot. I wore them sporadically at first, then less and less as the weeks passed. Ronan fussed, of course, his voice gentle, but edged with that worry only a son can carry for his aging mother. "Mom, you have to try," he'd say, adjusting the volume on the aids with the same careful attention he'd once given to tuning his guitar. The audiologist said it takes time to adjust. But I waved him off, signing clumsily with hands that remembered piano keys more than gestures. The world had become a place of whispers and static, and I was tired of straining to catch meaning from the fragments. It was easier to retreat into the cocoon of silence, to nod and smile, and let others fill in the gaps with their own assumptions. Little did I know that this retreat would become my greatest weapon, that the very disability everyone pitied would give me the power to hear truths they never intended to share. Then came Vanessa, sweeping into our lives like a summer storm, all cascading auburn waves and eyes like polished emeralds that promised loyalty but hid tempests. She appeared at Ronan's side during one of those awkward family dinners where grief still occupied Harold's empty chair like an unwelcome guest, her laugh tinkling through the dining room like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Ronan was 35 then, a software engineer with steady hands and a steadier heart, who'd waited too long for love to question its packaging when it finally arrived. He'd worked at the tech firm downtown for nearly a decade, writing code that made other people's lives easier while his own remained frustratingly solitary. Until Vanessa. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special," he'd said that first evening, his face lit up like Christmas morning. Vanessa had leaned in close, as if I were a fragile porcelain doll, her voice honey-sweet and deliberately loud. "Lydia, you're going to love this," she'd cooed, patting my hand with fingers cool as marble. "Ronan talks about you constantly. You raised such a wonderful man." From the start, there was something off-kilter about her, a flicker in her smile that didn't quite reach those emerald eyes, a hesitation before her compliments that felt rehearsed rather than heartfelt. She was beautiful, certainly with the kind of classic features that made people pause in grocery stores and restaurant lobbies. But beauty, I'd learned in my 7 decades, could be the most dangerous camouflage of all. Their courtship was a whirlwind of candlelit dinners and weekend getaways, Ronan returning from each date with stories that tumbled out like water from a broken dam. Vanessa worked in marketing for a boutique firm. She traveled frequently for clients. She shared his love of hiking and old movies. Each detail felt carefully crafted, like props in a stage production designed to dazzle rather than reveal. The engagement came 6 months later, announced over Sunday dinner with a ring that caught the light like captured starfire. "We want to have the ceremony here," Ronan had said, gesturing to the wraparound porch where Harold and I had exchanged our own vows 43 years earlier. "In the garden where you and Dad." "That would be lovely," I'd managed, though something cold had settled in my chest like swallowed ice. Vanessa's smile had been radiant, but I'd caught her quick glance around the dining room, inventory taking, calculating. It was the look of someone appraising real estate rather than appreciating memories. Their wedding was a lavish affair, white tents blooming across the lawn like exotic flowers, string lights twinkling overhead like captured fireflies. I stood at the ceremony's edge, straining to catch vows through the champagne-hazed murmur of guests. Vanessa's voice carried clearest through the evening air. "I do," she said, and in that moment, I swear I heard the unspoken addendum echoing beneath her words, "as long as it serves my purposes." Perhaps it was foolish, the suspicious ramblings of an old woman whose world had grown too quiet for comfort. But intuition is a quiet thief, stealing peace long before evidence arrives to justify the loss. After their honeymoon, 2 weeks in Tuscany that drained most of Ronan's savings, they moved into the guest house on my property. It was practical, I told myself. Ronan could keep an eye on me, help with the heavier chores that had become mountains since Harold's passing, and I could spoil them both with Sunday roasts and fresh-baked apple pies, the way families were supposed to care for each other. Vanessa played her part beautifully at first, all gracious smiles and theatrical domesticity. She'd breeze through my kitchen wearing aprons tied jauntily at her waist, chopping vegetables with flourishes that belonged on cooking shows rather than quiet family meals. "Lydia, darling, let me handle this," she'd say, patting my hand with that same cool touch. "You rest those ears of yours." But whispers, I was learning, have a way of traveling on evening breezes, especially when doors are left ajar and footsteps tread softly on creaky floors. The real unraveling began that autumn, when the leaves turned to flames and carpeted the lawn in gold and crimson warnings I should have heeded sooner. My hearing aids had been acting up for weeks, batteries draining faster than summer rain, feedback screeching at the most inconvenient moments during family dinners. The delicate electronics seemed to wilt in the October humidity, crackling and popping like logs on a dying fire. I'd returned from yet another frustrating appointment with Dr. Brennan, the audiologist whose office smelled of antiseptic and false promises. "The devices are functioning perfectly, Mrs. Hawthorne," he'd said, adjusting tiny screws with tools that looked like instruments of torture. Sometimes the brain needs more time to adapt to assisted hearing. "Have you been wearing them consistently?" The truth was I hadn't. The world through hearing aids felt like living underwater. Sounds distorted and delayed, conversations becoming guessing games where I smiled and nodded at what I hoped were appropriate moments. It was exhausting, this constant translation between what I heard and what I thought people meant. That evening, during our weekly family dinner, the breaking point arrived like a long-awaited storm. Ronan was describing his latest project at work. Something about cloud computing that required animated hand gestures and technical terms that buzzed through my aids like angry insects. Vanessa sat across from me, arms crossed, a faint smirk playing at her lips as she watched me struggle to follow the conversation. "Just get new ones, Mom," Ronan urged, his voice carrying the gentle patience that somehow made everything worse. "Technology improves every year. Maybe implants," Dr. Brennan mentioned. "Or maybe it's time to consider other options," Vanessa interrupted, her voice silk-wrapped steel. She leaned forward, emerald eyes glittering with something that wasn't quite sympathy. "Assisted living has come so far, Lydia. Wouldn't you like to be around people your own age? People who understand what you're going through? We could find you somewhere lovely, somewhere you wouldn't have to strain yourself trying to keep up." The words hit me like slaps. Assisted living, strain yourself, people your own age. As if 72 meant I should be warehoused with other discarded souls, tucked away where my inconvenient aging wouldn't disturb their perfectly orchestrated life. I nodded mutely, letting them believe whatever they chose to believe about my capabilities. But that night, as rain pattered against the windows like impatient fingers drumming on glass, I made a choice that would change everything. I removed the hearing aids entirely, folding them into the velvet-lined jewelry box where Harold's watch still ticked its loyal rhythm. From that moment forward, I became Lydia the deaf widow, nodding vaguely at conversations, cupping my hand to my ear with theatrical confusion, scribbling notes on pads that gathered crumbs from uneaten biscuits and desperate lies. It was easier than fighting, I told myself. Easier than explaining that partial hearing loss didn't mean complete helplessness, that I could still catch fragments and piece together meanings if people would just slow down, speak clearly, show a little patience. But patience, I was learning, was a luxury Vanessa had no intention of wasting on an elderly woman who stood between her and whatever she truly wanted. The transformation in my daughter-in-law was immediate and startling. Where before she'd spoken loudly and deliberately, as if addressing a slightly slow child, now she seemed to forget I existed at all. Conversations flowed around me like water around a stone, filled with glances and shared looks that spoke of decisions being made without my input. "Poor dear," she'd murmur to Ronan, loud enough for the walls to hear, but not, supposedly, for my broken ears. "She's fading faster than we thought. We might need to discuss practical matters soon, power of attorney, medical decisions, what's best for everyone involved." Ronan would shush her, his loyalty a shield I cherished even as doubt began seeding in his furrowed brow. But the damage was done. Vanessa had planted her flag in the territory of my supposed helplessness, and from that conquered ground, she began planning her campaign. Dinners became performances, Vanessa recounting her days in booming tones, while I responded with smiles and gestures, Ronan bridging gaps with forced cheer that fooled no one. Under the table, her foot would tap restless rhythms, and I'd catch her glancing at her watch as if time were currency she hoarded for more important investments. But in the quiet I'd cultivated, in the silence I'd chosen over struggle, secrets began blooming like nightshade in a forgotten garden. And I became the deaf woman who heard everything. It was mid-November when the mask first slipped, when I caught my first glimpse of the serpent coiled beneath Vanessa's porcelain facade. The air had turned crisp with the promise of frost, and I'd taken to spending my afternoons in the sunroom, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the guest house where Harold and I once shared morning coffee and evening dreams. I'd arranged myself in the wicker chaise by the French doors, a moth-eaten Afghan draped across my knees, playing the part of the drowsing widow with Oscar-worthy dedication. The doors were thin, warped by years of humidity and neglect, and sound carried across the patio like autumn leaves on an evening breeze. To anyone watching, I was simply napping, eyelids heavy, breathing deep and even the picture of elderly exhaustion. That's when I heard it. Vanessa's laughter, sharp and unfiltered, slicing through the golden afternoon like a blade through silk. "You're joking, right? About Lydia." Her voice, stripped of its usual honeyed coating, dripped with venom that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. That old bat couldn't hear a freight train if it ran through her skull. I could plot a murder right in front of her, and she'd probably ask me to pass the sugar. I froze, every nerve firing like live wires, the world suddenly sharpening into crystalline focus. This was Vanessa's true voice, not the theatrical projection she used in my presence, but her natural timbre, confident and cruel. The partial hearing loss the doctors had diagnosed was real enough to muddle crowds and cocktail parties, but one-on-one conversations? Crystal clear if you knew how to listen. The responding voice was male, tinny through what sounded like a phone speaker, but the words carried clearly enough to chill me to the bone. Good, because the timeline's accelerating, Ness. We need to move before spring, while Ronan's still buried in that promotion pitch. You get the old woman to sign the papers, we liquidate the assets, and you're free to start fresh. Clean slate, clean conscience. Vanessa's laugh was a hyena's cackle, predatory and pleased. Conscience? Please. That woman's been dead weight since Harold croaked. At least now she'll serve a purpose, funding my exit strategy from this suburban nightmare. My heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird desperate for flight. This wasn't casual cruelty or idle gossip. This was conspiracy, calculated and cold-blooded. They were discussing my future as if I were livestock to be sold at market, my home and security nothing more than line items in their twisted business plan. The power of attorney papers are already drafted. The male voice continued, professional and detached as a funeral director discussing burial options. Marcus worked out the details with that lawyer in the city. Green, the one with the flexible ethics. Once she signs, you'll have full financial control. The house, the investments, Harold's pension, everything funneled through offshore accounts before anyone realizes what happened. And if she refuses to sign? Vanessa's tone carried the casual curiosity of someone discussing the weather. Diminished capacity hearing, medical records showing progressive dementia, forged signatures from her doctor confirming mental decline. The state steps in, declares her incompetent, and guess who's the only family member positioned to take guardianship? The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough to understand the scope of their betrayal. This wasn't mere greed, it was systematic destruction, a siege carefully planned and methodically executed. They intended to strip me of everything Harold and I had built, to exile me to some sterile warehouse for the forgotten while they divided the spoils of a 40-year marriage. As their voices faded into the gathering dusk, I remained motionless in my chair, letting the terrible knowledge settle into my bones like winter cold. Vanessa thought she was hunting a helpless old woman, but she'd made a critical error in judgment. The deaf widow had heard every word. The pieces of their conspiracy fell into place over the following weeks, like dominoes arranged by a master strategist. The mysterious voice on the phone belonged to Marcus, a name that appeared with increasing frequency in Vanessa's late-night conversations, always spoken with an intimacy that made my skin crawl. Their relationship extended far beyond mere business partnership. The undercurrents of their exchanges reeked of history, shared secrets, and a bond forged in manipulation. I learned to time my movements with military precision, positioning myself in the sunroom during Vanessa's private calls, usually after Ronan left for work and before he returned with his pockets full of code and his head full of noble intentions. The guest house patio became my surveillance theater, every overheard conversation another scene in their twisted drama. "Marcus, darling," she'd purr into her phone, pacing the flagstones like a caged panther. The timeline's perfect. Ronan's promotion comes through December 20th. He'll be so drunk on success and bonus money, he won't notice the financial transfers until it's far too late. The plan unfolded like a poisonous flower blooming in real time. Marcus had connections in the financial district, lawyers with questionable ethics and flexible interpretations of elder care law. They'd forge medical documentation showing progressive cognitive decline, manufacture evidence of my supposed incompetence, and present themselves as my only salvation from institutional neglect. The beauty of it, Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker, oily with satisfaction, is that Ronan will thank you for taking charge. Guilty son syndrome. He'll be relieved someone else is handling the difficult decisions about his deteriorating mother. Vanessa's response was a laugh that belonged in horror films rather than family homes. He's already softening to the idea. Last week I mentioned how dangerous it is for her to live alone, how a fall could be fatal at her age. You should have seen his face, pure panic. Another month of gentle suggestions, and he'll be begging me to find her appropriate care. The scope of their planning was breathtaking in its thoroughness. They'd researched assisted living facilities upstate, expensive enough to drain my resources quickly, remote enough to make regular visits difficult for Ronan. Once installed, I'd become a ghost in my own life, a monthly expense to be managed until my accounts ran dry and more permanent solutions became necessary. What about the house? Marcus asked during one particularly chilling conversation. Victorian properties in Willow Creek are gold mines. Full renovation, flip it to young professionals fleeing the city. We're looking at a 7-figure return, easy. Already handled, Vanessa replied with the confidence of someone who'd planned every angle. I've been documenting structural issues, photographing water damage in the basement, building a case for necessary renovations that conveniently exceed the old woman's financial capacity. Ronan will see selling as the only responsible option. But the most devastating revelation came on a gray December afternoon when snow dusted the evergreens like powdered evidence of their guilt. Vanessa was discussing what she called the emotional landscape, her manipulation of Ronan's loyalty and love. "He's so predictable," she confided to Marcus, her voice dripping with contempt for the man she'd promised to honor and cherish. All that devotion to his sainted mother, all that guilt about leaving her alone. I've been feeding that guilt like kindling to a fire, suggesting he's neglecting his responsibilities, that a real son would ensure his mother's safety even if it meant difficult choices. Marcus chuckled, a sound like gravel grinding under heel. "And after the house is sold, the accounts are drained?" Then I discover evidence of his mother's financial irregularities. Forged checks, missing funds, medical bills paid with money meant for other expenses. Poor Ronan will be devastated to learn his beloved mother was stealing from her own care fund. But these things happen with dementia patients. Divorce becomes inevitable. Who could blame me for leaving a man whose family finances are in criminal chaos? The conversation ended with kisses blown through digital air, and I remained frozen in my chair until darkness swallowed the guest household. They weren't just stealing my money and my home. They were murdering my relationship with my son, turning his love into a weapon against both of us. That night, as rain drummed against the windows like accusations demanding justice, I made a decision that would transform me from victim to strategist. Vanessa and Marcus had chosen the wrong elderly woman to underestimate. The deaf widow was about to become their worst nightmare. War, I'd learned from Harold's military stories, required both intelligence and infrastructure. If I was going to defeat Vanessa and Marcus, I needed more than overheard conversations. I needed proof that would stand up in court, evidence so ironclad it could shatter their carefully constructed lies. The first step was legal counsel, but finding help without arousing suspicion proved trickier than anticipated. Vanessa monitored my movements with the dedication of a prison warden, always volunteering to drive me to appointments, always insisting on accompanying me into offices to help with communication difficulties. I needed an ally she didn't know existed. Salvation came in the form of Mr. Edmund Whitaker, an elderly attorney who lived 3 streets over in a rambling colonial that had seen better decades. We'd been neighbors for years, but rarely more than friendly acquaintances. Exactly the relationship that would make secret meetings possible. I began taking evening walks, slow constitutional strolls that happened to pass his house during his routine porch-sitting hours. "Evening, Lydia," he'd call from his wicker chair, pipe smoke curling around his head like incense. "How are you managing these days?" Our conversation started innocuously, whether neighborhood gossip, shared memories of better times. But gradually I began dropping hints about my situation, describing my concerns in terms vague enough to seem like ordinary elderly anxiety. "Mr. Whitaker," I said one crisp December evening, my breath visible in the frigid air, "hypothetically speaking, what would someone do if they suspected financial exploitation? Not that I'm accusing anyone, you understand, but with my hearing problems, sometimes I worry about missing important details." His roomy eyes sharpened behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and he leaned forward with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. "Hypothetically, that someone would need documentation, recordings if possible, and a lawyer who specializes in elder abuse law, which, hypothetically, I happen to be." We arranged our first real meeting for the following week, when Vanessa was scheduled for one of her mysterious business trips to the city. His office occupied the basement of his home, reached through a side entrance hidden by overgrown rhododendrons, perfect for clandestine consultations. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said after I'd spilled the entire sordid tale, "this is elder abuse by proxy, fraud conspiracy, and potentially criminal exploitation. But we need evidence, recordings, documents, proof of their communications and intentions." That's when I remembered Harold's old ham radio equipment, gathering dust in the garage like abandoned dreams. Harold had been a hobbyist, fascinated by the technology of communication, and his setup included recording capabilities I'd never understood during his lifetime. Necessity, however, is the mother of invention and revenge. I spent hours in that cold garage, fumbling with wires and frequencies, my arthritic fingers struggling with connections that seemed designed for younger, steadier hands. But gradually, piece by piece, I assembled a surveillance system worthy of intelligence professionals. The breakthrough came when I discovered Bluetooth connectivity, Harold's final upgrade, installed just months before his death. I could link the radio receiver to my smartphone, creating a recording device sophisticated enough to capture crystal clear audio from the guest house patio. The installation was delicate work. I waited until Vanessa left for her daily yoga class, an hour of blessed solitude when I could work without observation. The microphone, disguised as plant fertilizer spikes, went into the large planter closest to her favorite pacing route. The receiver, hidden among Harold's gardening tools, could record continuously for hours. My first capture was gold. Vanessa, 3 days before Christmas, hissing into her phone with barely contained excitement. Green says the psychological evaluation will seal everything. Progressive senile dementia, that's what they'll call it. Sign the power of attorney willingly or face state intervention and institutional commitment. Either way, we win. I documented everything in a leather-bound journal I'd found in Harold's desk. Dates, times, direct quotes. Analysis of their psychological manipulation techniques. Each entry was another nail in their coffin, another piece of evidence that would expose their conspiracy to the light. By Christmas Eve, I had enough recorded conversations to bury them both. December brought more than holiday decorations and cold winds. It brought Vanessa's psychological assault on Ronan, a campaign of emotional manipulation so subtle and systematic it nearly broke my heart to witness. She moved through our family dynamics like a virus, infecting every conversation with doubt about my competence and suggestions about my need for professional care. The transformation in my son was gradual but devastating to watch. Ronan had always been protective of me, especially after Harold's death. But Vanessa began twisting that natural concern into anxious paranoia. During family dinners, she'd pepper the conversation with carefully planted seeds of worry. "Ronan, honey," she'd say, fork poised midair like a conductor's baton. "Did you notice your mother left the stove on again yesterday? I caught it just in time. The whole house could have gone up in flames." The incident was fabricated, of course, but delivered with such convincing concern that Ronan's face immediately clouded with worry. "Mom, you didn't mention," he'd start, but I'd wave him off with theatrical confusion, playing my part in Vanessa's twisted production. "What stove? What fire?" I'd sign clumsily, watching my son's shoulders sag with the weight of imagined responsibility. Vanessa's strategy was diabolical in its effectiveness. She never directly criticized me or demanded immediate action. Instead, she positioned herself as the voice of reluctant reason, the caring daughter-in-law forced to voice uncomfortable truths. "I hate bringing this up," she'd say to Ronan while I pretended to doze in my chair, "but your mother's accidents are getting more frequent. Last week she fell asleep in the garden and nearly froze. What if I hadn't found her? What if you'd come home, too?" She'd let the implication hang in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. The conversations always followed the same pattern. Manufactured crisis, expressed concern, gentle suggestions about exploring options. Vanessa never used harsh terms like nursing home or institutional care. Instead, she spoke of assisted living communities and age-appropriate social environments where I could thrive among peers who understand the challenges of hearing loss. "Think about it, Ronan," she'd continue, her voice silk-wrapped steel. "Your mother's been so isolated since your father died. Wouldn't she be happier around people her own age? People who could provide professional support when she needs it." I watched my son wrestle with emotions I recognized all too well. The crushing guilt of adult children who love their aging parents but feel overwhelmed by the responsibility of care. Vanessa fed that guilt like oxygen to flames, making him doubt his ability to protect me, his judgment about my needs, his understanding of what love actually required. "Maybe you're right," he'd say finally, the words dragged from him like confessions under torture. She's all I have left of Dad, you know? The house, the memories." "But memories aren't more important than safety," Vanessa would reply. reaching across the table to squeeze his hand with perfectly calculated sympathy. You can't honor your father's memory by putting your mother at risk. The cruelest part was how she made her suggestions sound like sacrifices she was reluctantly willing to make. Of course, it would mean downsizing for us too, she'd sigh with theatrical resignation. This big house is expensive to maintain, and with your mother's care costs. But family comes first, right? We'll figure it out. She painted pictures of cozy condominiums downtown, closer to Ronan's office, easier to maintain. She spoke of European vacations we could finally afford once practical arrangements were made for my care. She dangled the promise of children they could raise without the burden of elderly supervision, of a life free from the constant worry about my safety and well-being. Each conversation was another brick in the prison she was building around Ronan's conscience, another bar in the cage of guilt and obligation she'd constructed to trap his better angels. By Christmas Eve, she had him so twisted up in knots of anxiety that he was practically begging her to help him make the right decision about my future. She'd turned my son's love for me into a weapon against us both. And the worst part was how completely unaware he remained of the manipulation. Christmas Eve dawned brittle and unforgiving, the kind of cold that seeps through window glass and settles into old bones like unwelcome prophecy. Snow dusted the evergreens outside my sunroom like powdered evidence of the season's false promises, while inside, the house brimmed with theatrical holiday cheer that felt as hollow as a funeral bell. Vanessa had transformed our home into a magazine spread. Pine garlands twisted around the banister like green serpents, candles flickering in every window like votive offerings to her own ambition. The Christmas tree dominated the living room corner, a towering Douglas fir draped in ornaments that caught the light like tears frozen in amber. Each decoration had been placed with calculated precision, creating the perfect backdrop for what she undoubtedly saw as her final performance. "Isn't this magical, Lydia?" she'd gushed while hanging Harold's treasured glass star at the tree's crown, her fingers caressing the heirloom with the possessive touch of someone already counting inheritance. Family traditions are so important, especially for someone in your situation. The gift exchange that morning had been a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as holiday sentiment. Vanessa presented me with a pearl necklace, my own mother's pearls, I realized with a chill, retrieved from my jewelry box and rewrapped as if generosity could mask theft. The accompanying card read, "For the woman who gave us everything. Soon you can rest knowing your family will always take care of what matters most." I accepted the gift with trembling hands, playing my part in her twisted pageant while mentally cataloging this latest violation. She was literally giving me my own possessions while positioning herself as the benevolent caregiver, the devoted daughter-in-law who understood the importance of preserving family treasures. Ronan, sweet and oblivious, beamed as he watched us exchange embraces beneath the mistletoe. "This is exactly what Dad would have wanted," he said, his voice thick with emotion that made my heart crack like ice under pressure. "Family together, taking care of each other." "Absolutely," Vanessa agreed, her smile radiant with false warmth, while her eyes glittered with triumph. "And speaking of taking care of each other, I have something special planned for tonight. A little surprise that will ensure our family's future is secure." The words sent ice water through my veins, but I maintained my facade of confused gratitude, patting her hand and mouthing "thank you," with the vacant smile she expected from her supposedly diminished mother-in-law. Throughout the day, she orchestrated moments of manufactured intimacy, adjusting my shawl with tender concern, speaking slowly and loudly enough for neighbors to witness her devotion, documenting every interaction with her phone camera for what I now understood would be evidence of her selfless caregiving when questions arose later about my sudden disappearance into institutional care. "Ronan, take a picture of your mother and me by the tree," she commanded with sugar-sweet authority. These might be our last Christmas photos in this beautiful old house. The prophetic nature of her words wasn't lost on me. By this time tomorrow, if her plan succeeded, I'd be signing papers that would transform me from homeowner to ward, from family matriarch to convenient problem solved. But Vanessa had made one critical error in her holiday preparations. She'd grown overconfident, careless in her victory before the battle was actually won. The machinery of their deception revealed itself in fragments during the days leading up to Christmas, each overheard conversation adding another gear to the clockwork of fraud they'd constructed with breathtaking audacity. Through my hidden recording system, I documented the full scope of their conspiracy, a web of falsified documents, bribed officials, and manufactured evidence that would have impressed professional criminals. Green, the corrupt lawyer Marcus had mentioned repeatedly, operated from a shadowy practice in the city's financial district, the kind of legal clinic that advertised elder care solutions and family protection services, while specializing in the systematic exploitation of vulnerable seniors. His partnership with Marcus stretched back years, apparently a relationship built on shared ethical flexibility and mutual profit. The medical documentation is flawless, Marcus boasted during one particularly chilling phone conversation I captured 3 days before Christmas. Green's contact at the Geriatric Assessment Center owes him favors dating back to that malpractice settlement he buried. Dr. Hartwell will sign off on cognitive decline reports without ever examining the patient, standard procedure for obvious cases of advancing dementia. Vanessa's laugh was sharp as breaking crystal, and the timeline accelerated. Green's filed preliminary guardianship papers citing emergency intervention requirements. Once she signs the power of attorney tomorrow night, we have 72 hours to complete asset transfers before anyone can request oversight hearings. The offshore accounts are ready, Cayman Islands, Swiss holdings, everything untraceable through layers of shell corporations. The sophistication of their operation stunned me. This wasn't amateur hour greed. This was professional theft, executed with the precision of seasoned con artists who'd clearly targeted other families before ours. They'd studied elder abuse law, identified loopholes in the guardianship system, and cultivated relationships with corrupt professionals who could provide the necessary institutional blessing for their crimes. What about potential resistance? Vanessa asked. If she refuses to sign voluntarily? Already handled, Marcus replied with the confidence of someone who'd anticipated every contingency. Green's prepared emergency committal papers based on the fabricated psych evaluation. 2 signatures from qualified physicians confirming immediate danger to self or others, and the state steps in with mandatory protective custody. She'll be in a locked facility before her son returns from his promotion celebration. The cruelty of their timing was particularly twisted. They'd deliberately chosen the night of Ronan's professional triumph, ensuring he'd be distracted by celebration and gratitude while they dismantled his mother's life. By the time he sobered up from success and champagne, I'd be warehoused in some distant institution, my assets drained, my property sold, my objections dismissed as the ravings of a demented old woman. The beauty of this approach, Green's oily voice crackled through the speaker during a 3-way call I'd recorded the previous week, is the legal precedent. Once guardianship is established based on medical necessity, reversal becomes nearly impossible. The system is designed to protect vulnerable adults from their own poor judgment. We're simply expanding that interpretation to include financial decisions that might jeopardize long-term care options. They'd weaponize the very laws intended to protect elderly citizens, turning guardianship statutes into tools of exploitation. The irony was bitter as winter wind. The same legal framework meant to shield people like me from abuse had become the instrument of our destruction. And if there are questions later, Vanessa pressed, neighbors, friends, people who might remember her as more competent. Memory is unreliable, Green replied with the casual authority of someone who'd coached this script before. Witnesses will recall signs they overlooked: the hearing loss, the confusion, the increasing dependence on family support. Hindsight bias is a powerful thing, Mrs. Hawthorne. People see what they expect to see, especially when official medical records confirm their revised memories. As I listened to them discuss my erasure with the clinical detachment of funeral directors planning a service, I felt something crystallize in my chest, not fear, but fury forged into surgical precision. They'd built their trap with meticulous care, but every system has weaknesses, and they'd made the fatal mistake of underestimating their intended victim. December 20th arrived wrapped in full celebration. The day Vanessa and Marcus had identified as the perfect storm of distraction and opportunity. Ronan's promotion had been a foregone conclusion for months. His innovative cloud computing solutions had saved the firm millions in operational costs. But the timing of the official announcement played directly into their conspiracy, like a final gift from malicious fortune. I watched my son prepare for his celebration dinner with a mixture of maternal pride and heartbreaking sorrow. He'd worked so hard for this recognition, staying late countless nights to perfect code that would revolutionize their client services, sacrificing weekends and social opportunities to build something meaningful in the digital realm his father never could have imagined. "Mom, can you believe it?" he'd said that morning, his face bright with the kind of joy that comes from dreams finally materializing. Senior Vice President of Innovation. Dad would have been so proud. Indeed, he would have. Harold had always believed in rewarding honest work with honest recognition, in building careers through competence rather than manipulation. He'd have been horrified to know how his son's achievement was being twisted into cover for grand theft. Vanessa played her part to perfection, bubbling with enthusiasm that seemed genuine to anyone who didn't know better. She'd arranged dinner at the Willowbrook Country Club, expensive, exclusive, the kind of venue that would keep Ronan occupied for hours with colleagues eager to congratulate the firm's rising star. "You deserve this celebration, darling," she cooed, adjusting his tie with wifely devotion while her eyes calculated the timeline. "Stay as late as you want, network, enjoy the recognition. Your mother and I will have a quiet evening together, won't we, Lydia?" I nodded with the vacant smile she expected, but inside I was mapping her strategy with military precision. The country club was 40 minutes away, the dinner scheduled for 7 o'clock, with speeches and toasts likely extending past 10. That gave her a 3-hour window to execute the power of attorney signing. Plenty of time to stage the scene and establish her narrative before Ronan returned home. The bonus money was another calculated element, a substantial sum that would arrive in Ronan's account the following week, providing convenient cover for the initial asset transfers. By the time he noticed unusual activity in my accounts, Vanessa could claim she was simply organizing finances to accommodate his increased income, ensuring his mother's care costs wouldn't burden his new responsibilities. Family financial planning, she'd call it, wrapping theft in the language of responsibility and foresight. As Ronan kissed my forehead goodbye that evening, heading off to claim his professional triumph, I knew I was watching the last innocent moment before everything changed. The celebration would continue as planned, but the aftermath would be nothing like what anyone expected. Night fell on Christmas Eve like a curtain dropping on the final act of Vanessa's elaborate production. The house settled into expectant silence, creaking with the weight of accumulated secrets and approaching revelation. Through the frost-etched windows, the guest house glowed with warm light, but the illumination felt sinister rather than welcoming, a spider's web gleaming with deadly beauty. Ronan had texted from the country club around 9, his messages bubbling with champagne-fueled excitement and gratitude for colleagues who'd recognized his contributions. "Having the best night ever," he'd written. "Home late. Celebrate with you both tomorrow." The messages had probably been screenshotted by Vanessa, preserved as evidence of his absence during what she planned to be the pivotal moment of her conspiracy. She approached around 10:30, moving through the connecting walkway between our houses with the measured pace of someone savoring anticipated victory. I had positioned myself in the living room, surrounded by the detritus of Christmas Eve, wrapping paper scattered like camouflage, empty eggnog glasses catching lamplight like amber promises. "Lydia, dear," she said, settling beside me on Harold's old leather couch with a manila folder thick as a family Bible. "I have something important we need to discuss. Some paperwork that will make everything so much easier for everyone." Her voice carried the practiced cadence of someone who'd rehearsed this moment, but underneath the honey coating I detected the tremor of adrenaline. This was it, the culmination of months of planning, the moment when all her manipulation and psychological warfare would crystallize into legal reality. She slid the documents across the coffee table with reverent ceremony, each page marked with neon sticky notes indicating signature lines. Power of attorney forms, their language dense, with legalese designed to obscure rather than illuminate, granting her complete control over my financial existence. "Just some estate planning documents," she explained with theatrical concern, her fingers drumming nervous rhythms against her thigh. "With your hearing difficulties, it makes sense to have someone you trust handle the complicated financial matters. Ronan's so busy with his promotion, and I have experience with these things from my marketing background." I feigned confusion, squinting at the papers with the bewildered expression she expected from her supposedly diminished mother-in-law. The documents were professionally prepared, their margins filled with official seals and notarization stamps that would legitimize the theft in legal eyes. Green had done thorough work. This wasn't crude forgery, but sophisticated fraud designed to withstand casual scrutiny. "Estate," I mouthed, playing up my supposed hearing loss while my mind raced through strategic calculations. "What estate?" "Your finances, dear. The house, Harold's pension, your savings accounts. Just organizing everything so it's easier to manage your care needs as you get older. Nothing changes except someone responsible handling the paperwork." She leaned closer, her breath carrying hints of peppermint and anticipated triumph. "Sign here, and here, and here," she instructed, producing an expensive pen with golden flourishes. "Then we can all relax and enjoy the holidays knowing everything's properly arranged." I lifted the pen with trembling fingers, not from age or confusion, but from rage carefully disguised as frailty. Tomorrow would bring revelation and reckoning, but tonight required one final performance. "Tomorrow," I signed slowly, deliberately. "Head hurts." Her smile faltered, but only for a microsecond before professional composure reasserted itself. "Of course, dear. Tomorrow." New Year's Eve arrived swathed in fog-thick as funeral shrouds, the town clock's midnight tolling echoing through Willow Creek like a death knell for deception. I had spent the week since Christmas in careful preparation, consulting with Mr. Whitaker, organizing my evidence, and setting the stage for a confrontation that would shatter Vanessa's carefully constructed reality like glass under a sledgehammer. The morning broke gray and unforgiving, frost etching the windows with crystalline accusations. I waited in the sunroom where this all began, my leather journal and smartphone arranged like battle standards on the wicker table. The unsigned power of attorney documents lay beside them, bait in a trap that was about to spring shut. Footsteps descended the stairs, Ronan's heavy with champagne residue from his celebration. Then Vanessa's light and predatory, moving through the house like a shark scenting blood in familiar waters. "Mom, you up early?" Ronan called, his voice thick with sleep and lingering confusion from the previous night's festivities. "In here, son," I replied, clear as church bells on Sunday morning, No gestures, no theatrical confusion, no pretense of deafness. The effect was electric. He froze in the doorway, Vanessa tumbling into his back like a collision of worlds. Her silk robe askew and her emerald eyes wide with something approaching terror. "What?" she started, but the word died in her throat as understanding crashed over her like ice water. I stood slowly, deliberately, facing them both with the dignity of someone who'd spent months planning this moment. "Sit down, both of you. We have considerable talking to do." Ronan's jaw worked soundlessly, emotions flickering across his face like storm clouds. Confusion, hope, dawning realization that his mother wasn't the diminished creature they believed her to be. "Mom, you can hear me? All this time?" "Every whisper," I confirmed, my voice steady as granite. "Every scheme, every lie, every plan to steal my life and destroy our family." Vanessa's face drained of color, emeralds turning to slate as she calculated escape routes that no longer existed. Her mask was slipping, revealing the predator beneath the porcelain facade. I activated my phone's recording app with theatrical precision, letting them see exactly what I was doing. I believe in being thorough when it comes to family business. "Vanessa, would you like to explain to your husband about Marcus? About the offshore accounts? About the forged medical records declaring me incompetent?" The silence that followed was deafening. Not the comfortable quiet of family contentment, but the hollow vacuum that exists in the moment before worlds collapse. Ronan looked between us like a man watching his universe tear apart at the seams. "Van," he whispered, and in that single syllable I heard 40 years of heartbreak condensed into one broken question. Vanessa's composure shattered like fine china hurled against stone, her carefully maintained facade crumbling to reveal the desperate creature beneath. She lunged forward, hands grasping for the power of attorney documents, as if possessing them could somehow restore her crumbling control. "It's not what you think," she shrieked, her voice stripped of its honeyed coating to reveal raw panic underneath. "You don't understand the full picture, Lydia. You think you've been so clever, playing deaf and gathering your little recordings, but you have no idea how deep this goes." Ronan caught her wrist before she could reach the papers, his grip firm, but his face a map of bewilderment and growing horror. "Van, what is she talking about? What recordings? What medical records?" I pressed play on my phone, and Vanessa's recorded voice filled the sunroom like poison gas. That old bat couldn't hear a freight train if it ran through her skull. I could plot a murder right in front of her, and she'd probably ask me to pass the sugar. The color drained from Ronan's face as his wife's true voice, cold, calculating, cruel, destroyed whatever illusions he'd harbored about the woman he'd married. But Vanessa wasn't finished. Cornered animals, I'd learned, often reveal their most dangerous nature when escape becomes impossible. "You want the truth?" she snarled, whirling on me with wild eyes that glittered with malicious triumph. "Fine. Let's talk about truth. That lover you overheard me conspiring with? Marcus isn't just some business partner or random accomplice. He's family, Lydia. Your family." The words hit me like physical blows, but she pressed on with the vicious satisfaction of someone delivering a final, devastating strike. "Marcus Hawthorne, Harold's sister's boy, your precious nephew, the little golden child you bounced on your knee at family barbecues. He's been feeding me information for months, will provisions, safe combinations, bank account numbers, every family secret you thought was buried with your sainted husband." The room tilted around me as memories crashed together like colliding trains. Marcus at Christmas dinners, always asking pointed questions about Harold's business dealings. Marcus volunteering to help with estate paperwork after the funeral, spending hours in Harold's study under the guise of organizing important documents. Marcus, whom I'd trusted implicitly because blood was supposed to mean something, because family was supposed to be sanctuary. Harold cut ties with his sister's family years ago, Vanessa continued, her voice dripping with poisonous satisfaction. Did you know that, Lydia? Your husband discovered Marcus's little gambling problem, the embezzlement from his law firm, the cocaine habit that nearly destroyed his career. Harold refused to bail him out one final time, said some people had to learn consequences the hard way. Ronan gasped, pieces clicking together in his engineer's mind with terrible precision. That's why you knew so much about Mom's finances, about the house systems, about Dad's routines. Marcus provided the roadmap, Vanessa confirmed with vicious pride. Every family weakness, every emotional trigger, every legal loophole. He even helped forge the medical documentation. Turns out having a law degree makes fraud so much easier to execute professionally. The betrayal was complete, extending far beyond mere greed into the realm of family destruction. They hadn't just targeted my money. They'd weaponized decades of trust, love, and shared history against me. Blood runs thicker than water, she finished with a hyena's laugh, but money runs thicker than blood. The sound of sirens cutting through the morning air was the most beautiful music I'd heard since Harold's last whispered, "I love you." Mr. Whitaker had timed the police arrival perfectly, close enough to catch Vanessa's confession, far enough to let her condemn herself completely. "Mrs. Hawthorne, we received your call about elder fraud and conspiracy," Detective Martinez announced as uniformed officers filled my sunroom like the answer to months of prayer. "We've been monitoring this situation since your attorney contacted our financial crimes unit." Vanessa's face cycled through emotions like a malfunctioning theater mask. Shock, rage, desperation, and finally a cold calculation that chilled me to the bone. Even cornered, even caught, she was still searching for angles, still believing her charisma could manipulate her way free. "This is ridiculous," she declared, switching to her public persona with practiced ease. "I've been caring for this woman for months. She's clearly confused, paranoid from her hearing loss and social isolation. Marcus is a family friend trying to help organize her affairs." "Save it!" Detective Martinez interrupted, holding up a tablet displaying bank records, forged documents, and communications between Vanessa and Marcus dating back 6 months. "Your nephew rolled over the minute we mentioned federal charges. Elderly exploitation, fraud, conspiracy. He's looking at 15 years minimum. You might want to consider cooperation yourself." The arrests were swift and professional. Vanessa in handcuffs, spitting fury and threats about wrongful prosecution while neighbors gathered on their porches to witness the spectacle. Marcus hauled in from his city apartment an hour later, breaking down completely when confronted with recorded evidence of his betrayal. The local news crew arrived by noon, transforming our quiet street into a circus of cameras and microphones. "Elderly widow foils family fraud conspiracy," the evening headlines would read. But the media attention felt secondary to the deeper satisfaction of justice finally served. The web they'd spent months weaving had become their cage, and I held all the keys. In the silence that followed the arrests, after the police cars disappeared and the neighbors returned to their homes with enough gossip to fuel months of coffee shop conversations, Ronan and I sat in my sunroom like survivors of a natural disaster, surveying the emotional wreckage of our shattered family. My son had aged years in the span of hours, his face etched with lines that spoke of innocence lost and trust destroyed. He stared at his hands, Harold's hands, gentle and strong, as if they belonged to a stranger. "How long did you know?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Months," I admitted, the truth settling between us like a shared wound. "I wanted to tell you, son, but I needed proof, and I needed to understand how deep the betrayal went." He nodded slowly, processing the magnitude of deception that had surrounded him. She made me doubt you, made me think you were declining, that you needed God, Mom. I was ready to put you in a home. I thought I was protecting you. She's very good at what she does, I said gently, reaching across to touch his hand. This wasn't your fault, Ronan. Vanessa is a professional. This isn't the first family she's targeted. The tears came then, silent and devastating, as my grown son wept for the wife he'd never really known, for the marriage that had been built on lies, for the family trust that would take years to rebuild. I held him as I had when he was 7 and had nightmares when he was 15, and his first girlfriend broke his heart when he was 25 and Harold died. We'll get through this, I promised, the words carrying 40 years of maternal certainty. Your father always said that family isn't just blood, it's choice. We choose each other, every day, through good times and betrayal. Outside, snow began falling again, covering the scars in our lawn where police cars had parked, blanketing the guest house where so many lies had been spoken. Winter was ending, and with it, the longest deception of our lives. Spring would come, as it always did, bringing new growth from old wounds. Spring arrived in Willow Creek like a cautious visitor, tentatively painting the world in shades of hope after the harsh winter of our family's darkest season. The guest house stood empty now, its windows reflecting morning sunlight instead of harboring whispered conspiracies. I'd had the locks changed, the phone lines disconnected, the patio furniture stored away like artifacts from a war we'd finally won. Ronan moved back into the main house, gradually, one box at a time, as if testing whether the foundation of our relationship could bear the weight of rebuilding. Those first weeks were delicate negotiations between love and lingering hurt, conversations that started and stopped like engines struggling to turn over in cold weather. I should have seen it, he'd say during our morning coffee rituals, staring into his cup as if answers might surface like cream. The signs were all there, how she talked about money, how she looked at the house, how she made me doubt my own judgment about you. Manipulation is a skill, I'd remind him gently, refilling his cup with the coffee Harold had taught me to brew 40 years ago. Vanessa spent months studying our weaknesses, learning exactly which emotional buttons to push. You loved her. That wasn't stupidity, it was hope. The healing came in increments measured not in days, but in shared silences that no longer felt dangerous, in conversations where neither of us flinched at unexpected sounds, in moments when laughter returned to rooms that had held only tension for too long. We cleaned out Harold's study together, sorting through papers that Vanessa and Marcus had violated with their scheming hands, reclaiming our family history from their contamination. The legal proceedings provided a framework for closure. Vanessa pled guilty to elder fraud and conspiracy charges, accepting a plea deal that sent her to minimum security for 3 years. Marcus, facing federal charges due to his law license, received 5 years and disbarment. The restitution they paid, money recovered from offshore accounts and liquidated assets, went toward renovating the guest house into a proper studio space where I could pursue the painting I'd abandoned after Harold's death. You know what I've learned through all this, Ronan said one evening as we worked side by side in the garden, planting Harold's favorite roses in soil enriched by composted betrayal. Trust isn't something you give once and forget about. It's something you build every day, with every honest conversation, every kept promise, every moment you choose to show up for the people who matter. His hands were dark with earth, his face streaked with honest sweat instead of the stress that had haunted him during Vanessa's reign of psychological terror. He looked like his father in that moment, a man who understood that real love meant work, patience, and the daily choice to see and value each other clearly. The guest house renovation was scheduled to begin in June, transforming a place of deception into a sanctuary for creativity and genuine connection. New love, 320 words. Eliza came into our lives through the most unexpected channel, a sign language class I'd enrolled in at the community center, determined to turn my partially impaired hearing into a bridge rather than a barrier. She was the instructor, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair that caught light like spun moonbeams and hands that danced through conversations with the grace of decades spent translating silence into meaning. "You don't need to learn signing for practical reasons," she observed after my third class, watching me struggle with fingerspelling. "Your hearing loss isn't severe enough to require alternative communication. So why are you here?" I found myself telling her the entire story, the pretended deafness, the overheard conspiracies, the family betrayal, and eventual justice. She listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that communication extended far beyond the mechanics of sound and gesture. "Silence saved you," she said when I finished, her hand shaping words as she spoke. "Most people fear quiet, fill it with noise and distraction. But you learn to listen with more than your ears." Our friendship grew like Harold's roses, slowly, with careful tending and patient cultivation. She began joining Ronan and me for Sunday dinners, bringing homemade bread and stories from her work with deaf children at the state school. Her presence filled spaces in our home that I hadn't realized were empty, not replacing Harold's memory, but complementing it with new warmth. "She makes you happy," Ronan observed one evening after Eliza had left, the kitchen still fragrant with her lemon lavender cookies. Different than with Dad, but real. He was right. What I felt for Eliza wasn't the passionate intensity of young love, but something deeper, the recognition of kindred spirits who'd both learned that the most profound connections often happen in comfortable silence, where understanding flows without the need for constant words. At 72, I was discovering that the heart's capacity for growth never diminishes, only deepens with wisdom earned through surviving life's cruelest lessons. Justice, I've learned, isn't the same as revenge, though the distinction can blur when you're standing in the wreckage of your own betrayed trust. Revenge seeks to inflict equivalent pain, to balance suffering with suffering until some primitive equation feels satisfied. Justice seeks truth, accountability, and the restoration of order disrupted by cruelty and deception. Vanessa and Marcus receive consequences proportional to their crimes. Prison sentences that acknowledge the severity of elder abuse while offering possibilities for eventual redemption. I felt no satisfaction in their imprisonment, only relief that other families would be protected from their predatory schemes. The Hawthorne legacy, I realized, wasn't contained in property deeds or bank account balances, but in the love Harold and I had built through 40 years of choosing each other daily, in the son we'd raised to value integrity over convenience, in the community connections that had sustained us through loss and betrayal. Our family tree had been pruned of rotten branches, Marcus's treachery excised like diseased wood, but the healthy growth remained strong. Ronan's capacity for love, slightly damaged but not destroyed, was healing with time and honest conversation. The house still echoed with Harold's laughter in quiet moments, still held the warmth of decades spent building something real and lasting. Some wounds leave scars, but scars are proof of survival, evidence that what tried to destroy us ultimately made us stronger. Today, as autumn returns to Willow Creek with its familiar promise of change and renewal, I wear my hearing aids when I choose to, not when others demand it. My hearing remains selectively impaired, but my understanding has never been clearer. Silence, I discovered, reveals more than sound ever could, not just the schemes of those who would harm us, but the depth of love from those who truly matter. If my story has resonated with you, please subscribe to Voices of Rosa and share where you're watching from in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we almost didn't survive to tell. Remember, in a world full of noise, sometimes the wisest choice is to listen with your heart rather than your ears. The deaf widow who heard it all sends you love and the wisdom that comes from learning to trust your deepest instincts, even when the world tells you they're wrong.